This week I had one of those times when sometimes sermons get interrupted when you are starting to work on them and you're starting to put them together, and it could be something. What I've had happen in the past is that sometimes it has been something that I've read that gets in the way. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's something someone has said. Oftentimes it is something that has happened in the world that kind of comes up and says, I need to be paid attention to. What was different about this week was that I didn't actually change where I was starting with all of this. We are starting this morning with the next two lines of the Lord's Prayer. These are lines that you can take individually, but also for reasons of scheduling, but also because they work very well together. We're taking them together this morning. And forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Those are the words that were going through my head at one point on Tuesday night, and we were sitting at home, and I was scrolling through things, learning more, at least what we knew at the time, about what had happened down in Texas. I imagine there were probably several of us that were watching the news and seeing what was going on and what was taking place down there. And I remember as I was doing that, I knew what the script was going to be after this. Like, we know what the script is going to happen 24, 48 hours after something like that happens. And so I was waiting to see all of those things begin to come back out. And so that was what started the change in where I thought I was going this Sunday. I thought this sermon was going to go differently. I was talking to a friend of mine, and I told him, well, all I can say is hold on, because here we go. That's where it is going. And so as we come into this, in light of things that have happened in this last week, we need to start with something kind of important, how many of these things are tied together in this prayer. And that is that these two lines, there's some parts of it that kind of get dropped off if we aren't careful, that are seemingly unimportant as we look at it. In fact, it feels like it kind of impedes the flow of the prayer if we put that little word "and" in. But it actually is written in the Greek. In Matthew and Luke's gospel, you actually have the word "and" is in there. Oftentimes we don't put it in there because it makes things feel more cluttered. But what that does, though, in that prayer, is that it says everything that is on either side of me here, these things are all connected together. This is all one thought. And so we come to that and we say, give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. These three lines, in fact, we could have included last week's line, give us this day our daily bread, into this also. These three lines, they serve as the development of the thesis that we get in thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That is the big thesis statement of the prayer. These three lines are the development of that. They tell us how this is all going to work, and the thesis builds out what it means to hallow God's name. The one who we say at the very beginning of the prayer we call our Father. Our lines for today and last week are the details of how all of this works. So we receive our daily bread, our purposeful, our meaningful, our existential, our essential bread that gives us direction, health, strength, guidance in life. Sometimes that is quite literally bread that we are given. Other times it's that thing that we need, whatever it is we need, so that we can go through the day and we can figure out what we are supposed to be, who we are supposed to be in this moment. And forgive us, and which way you have learned this, forgive us our trespasses, debts, sins, as we have forgiven our debtors, those who have trespassed or sinned against us. There's the next line. In whatever way that we've learned it, and we've all learned it a little bit differently, and I've been around long enough now that you tell me which one we're doing, I can probably say it right most of the time. I've had to say it enough different ways. But it all comes back to, what is sin? What is this thing we're being forgiven of? And it's sin. And sin, the most simple definition we have of sin is that we miss the mark. That we miss the mark, we miss the goal. The goal is for God's kingdom to be here on earth just as it is in heaven. And on earth as it is in heaven. That's the goal. That's the purpose. There's a lot more that we could say to that, but a very simple thing is to say we just miss it. We miss doing that thing that helps to bring God's kingdom about here on earth. That is sin. So we have sin, and we ask, well, what is forgiveness then? What are we doing when we forgive? Whether it's ourselves or whether it is others. There's a whole lot of things that forgiveness isn't. We actually had a really good, I'm not surprised by this, but we had a really good conversation about this in Sunday school this morning. And some things that forgiveness isn't. Forgiveness isn't reconciliation. Just because you have forgiven someone doesn't mean that everything is fine between you. That's not how that works, although that is a popular myth that's out there. That's not how that works. To say that something is forgiven doesn't mean that it's forgotten. There's another myth that's out there. We hear folks say to forgive and forget. That actually does no one any good if we say forgive and forget. That's another myth that's out there. That's not forgiveness. So we ask the question then, what is forgiveness? And this is where I love Adam Hamilton in his book on the Lord's Prayer. He gives this line and he says, forgiveness is not forgetting, but forgiveness is releasing our resentment, our visions of retribution, our bitterness, and hate. Do you see where I might have got hit with that this week? Reading those lines in light of the things that were going on. After hearing about the events in Texas, did anyone else have any of these emotions that are tied up in here? I think I checked all the boxes. Pretty sure I checked all the boxes on there. And not just against the shooter, but on the society that continues to let all of this happen. Like, it hit hard for me. Forgiveness is letting go of those emotions. But here's the challenge, because there's some more myths that we have to dispel on that. Forgiving is not burying those emotions away. You ever done that one? Like, oh, I've forgiven, I've dealt with those emotions, but all we've done is we've just buried them really far down so they don't ever see the light of day. You know when those things come back up? In the most stressful and hard times that you're going to find. Why? Because it takes a lot of work to keep things buried, because those things want to come out. And so when we're stressed about other things here, those things come out again if we don't ever actually deal with them and process them. Forgiveness is not dealing with those things. Forgiveness is not burying those emotions. Forgiveness is also not just pushing those emotions to the back until you need them. I mean, we're all guilty of that at some point where, well, I've forgiven, but we haven't really. We just wait for that time when those things become really useful to pull out and use again. Even in the best of intentions, sometimes we do that. It just happens. We can't help ourselves. We think we have dealt with it, but then something happens and you're like, oh, well, but I remember back when. Have you ever had your kids pull that one on you? You know, there's another one. That's not real forgiveness then. Forgiveness is also not dressing things up with new words. Not taking these emotions of resentment, retribution, bitterness, and hate, and just putting new names on them so we can make things feel good. Putting labels on them. Instead of those things, we might call them justice, accountability, or safety. There's another big one in there. That's not forgiveness either. If we just put a new name on something, that's not forgiveness. Forgiveness means truly letting go of those emotions. Resentment, retribution, bitterness, hate feel good. They feel like they can do so much, like they have a lot of power, and they do. But the trouble is that ultimately anything born out of those emotions will fail. They will fall short, and they will cause more hurt and harm. And so we're left, if we can do that at all, or even if we can just begin the process of letting go of those things, how do we do that? How do we make that happen? And the prayer doesn't leave us hanging. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. The second thing we've got to do in this is that we've got to remember that ancient Greek didn't have punctuation. It was really convenient to have Julie Sherman down in Sunday school this morning as an English teacher, because English people, us who speak English natively, love our punctuation. It was one of the biggest comments I always got on all of my papers when I was learning how to write was I used too many commas. All the time. I just put them in there. No, I need a break there, comma. Well, ancient Greek doesn't have commas. They don't have punctuation. We don't know. They didn't know what to do with that. And so we have to go back later. Some of the advantages we have is that we can put punctuation in there where it needs to be, where it fits. And we look at this line that says, lead us not into temptation, that maybe we need a comma in there. Adam Hamilton tells the story. He doesn't remember where he got it. He's tried to go back and look at this, but he came across someone one time who said, what you really need in there is a comma after lead us. Lead us, comma, pause. Who lead us? God lead us. Because that's who this whole prayer is directed to. Our Father in heaven, lead us. Forgive us, and we forgive others, and lead us. Now here's the tricky part, though. What do we do with the not into temptation? Are we asking God not to lead us into temptation? Because that doesn't make sense. If we don't have the comma there, that's how that prayer feels like. We're saying, God, don't lead me into temptation. Like God needs our petitions. Otherwise, he's going to lead us into temptation. That doesn't work. Whether we're talking about temptation or testing, the word is the same there. That's not what God does. God is not leading us into temptation. Putting that comma in there separates things out for us. We say, Lord, lead us not into temptation, because that's what we're doing. That whole statement in there is a statement of our own doing. We are tempted. We know we are tempted. We know that's how we're going to do things. We know that's a part of the life that we live. Lord, lead us not into temptation. That's as we're doing it. That's our story. That's what we do. We're doing that ourselves. But we focus on the first part of the phrase, lead us, and then deliver us from evil. As human beings, we are naturally tempted. That's why Jesus was tempted in the wilderness. Now, he never succumbed to that. That's what happens when you're the Son of God. You don't succumb to that temptation. You can handle that. But we aren't very good at ourselves, and we know ourselves. And we know that we will be tempted and that we will succumb to it at some point in time. And so when we say not into temptation, it's what we know of ourselves. But deliver us from evil, or deliver us from the evil one. However, you learn that it both fits both ways. You can almost say this whole line by taking out this middle part there, and you can almost say, lead us away from the evil one. That is what we're asking of God in this petition. Lead us away from this evil. Help us to stay on target, stay on that path, to shoot for the goal. This is what we're asking God. This is what our petition is. And how do we know that God is doing this, that God is doing these things? Because he gives us our daily bread. Because he is our Father and he is holy. Our scripture reading this morning comes from 1 Peter chapter 5, and it goes into kind of more depth of the things that Jesus is saying in Matthew and Luke's Gospels. We're not going to go through the entire passage here, but the first part, there are some words that I want to point out, and they are humble, clear-headed, alert, resist, and stand firm. These are the things that we work on so that we know that we are staying on goal. That we are keeping ourselves from veering off one side or the other. And then we get to verse 10. After you have suffered for a little while, the God of all grace, the one who called you into his eternal glory in Christ Jesus, will himself restore, empower, strengthen, and establish you. Look at those words at the start. Look at verse 10 that is down there. Those words in that verse encapsulate what we are praying in the Lord's Prayer. Let that sink in for a second. Do you know what the words we read here, do you know what the words we say in the Lord's Prayer remove, what they take away? Fear. They take away fear. They take away that fear that has a tendency to fill us up. Do you know what the greatest tool that the devil, the evil one, or just plain evil, whatever you want to call them, do you know what the greatest tool it is that they have in their arsenal? It's fear. Fear is a great motivator for so many things. And it's not that even that it's really all that powerful. It's really not. But it pushes and it prods and it convinces us of things. It can be pernicious and subtle, and it can be very devious. And it's got a long time frame. It is not urgent. It plays the long game. The thing for us to remember is that the devil doesn't really have that much power, but what little power he has, he uses in such very effective ways that will bring out the worst in ourselves, that plays to our weaknesses and to the imperfect nature that we have, and will do so to devastating effect. And this past week is an example of that. And not just this past week, but you can go back to the last 20 plus years in the recent time. You can go back to Columbine. And we can see this at work. Look at what fear, and also what goes along with that so very well, is temptation. Look at what those things do together. After Columbine, we were horrified by the things that we saw happen. And it became clear that the individuals involved had severe mental problems that needed to be addressed, but we weren't sure how to deal with any of that at the time. We were just starting to get a handle on what was going on, much less the help that they were going to need. But now, after all of these years, the individual this week didn't present with any issues that would have caused a red flag. We're starting to learn some more things, but that it's taken so long to get there means that this wasn't anything that was going to cause folks concern. But that actually makes things worse, because it means that his behavior has been so normalized that such that when someone now has a struggle and a problem and whatever else it is that is going on, instead of being an option of last resort when your mental health problems have completely taken you over and you're no longer making what anyone would consider a good, rational, clear-headed decision, now walking into a school, taking a gun into a school has become a first option. And how in the world does that happen? Fear. Temptation. Fear that we don't understand why someone would do this. Fear that we might cause even more harm if we do the wrong thing in trying to find a solution to this. Fear that if we do the right thing, or whatever we think the right thing might be, that we might be excommunicated or ostracized from the groups and communities that we're a part of. Fear that if we aren't careful, we'll set ourselves up for other bigger problems down the road. Built into that are other fears that have come that are a part of our nation today. Fear of each other, fear of institutions, fear of other groups of people, fear of a loss of autonomy and a sense of self. Mixed into that are temptations. Temptations to push harder in one direction or another, because if we don't push, then what purpose do we have? What power do we have? Who might be in charge if we don't push in that way? There are temptations of opportunity that situations like this can be used to further one agenda over another. There are temptations of ego that say that I have all the answers and folks would just do what I say, then everything would be fine. There are temptations even that we know who to blame. Because right now, if you are here in person or if you are watching online, we all have someone to blame in mind. And I'm pretty sure that it all looks a little bit different in all of our minds right now. That we're not all thinking of the same person or the same thing. In fact, I've tried to be very intentional about not saying any name or anything in here, just kind of pointing some stuff out, because I know that that's how this works. We've all got different folks, different things, different stuff in mind. I'd like to put names and say things and do all of that, but I know that's not forgiveness. That was part of it that hit hard this week. That's also why I had to take Facebook off of my phone. I didn't delete my account, but I had to take it off my phone because I needed to introduce a barrier in there that kept me from going on and saying dumb things, because that was a temptation that I had. Because I'm still working on the forgiveness part. But I also need to continue to pray, lead us. Lead us. Because here is the truth. That even if we acted today and we figured out exactly the right thing that we needed to do, and God told us exactly the right things that we needed to do, we are going to be several generations away from fixing the problem. Because that's the way these things work. We aren't going to magically fix things overnight. We aren't going to be able to, we aren't going to get to the point where, someone's not going to want to walk into a school and kill 19 kids and 2 adults. And that means that for the foreseeable future, we will need to find ways to continue to harden our schools, but without hurting our kids' mental health any more than it already is. It means we're going to need more school resource officers and counselors, and we're going to need more training for kids, teachers, administrators, staff, parents, and communities, and how all of this works. That is the nature of sin. Forgiveness says that eventually we can move away from these things, but it's going to take us time. When we say, lead us, not into those temptations that we are already experiencing, but deliver us from evil. Deliver us from those temptations and those fears that we already have. We know what some of the things are that we need to do. We know that in the United States we have a gun problem. We know that is a thing. We know we have to do something about it, but that gets tempered by the fact that we know there was a reason why the founding fathers of our nation put the Second Amendment in our Bill of Rights. We also know that we are having a mental health crisis, one that was already bad before we got to the pandemic, and has only gotten worse since then. And we have to do something about it. Lead us. Lead us. What does that look like for us to be a part of that solution? I'm not going to give anything beyond just kind of what can we do here and now in our community as a part of that. Some of the things that we have planned for this summer are a good start. Just having a good VBS where we invite as many kids as we can round up to come and to share and be a part of that is a good start. And for all of us, as many of us as can be, to be there for it. To engage with the kids, to have fun with them, to do crafts together, to eat snacks together, to do all of that stuff together with them. And then when we have our art story time in the summer, same thing. For as many of us as can be there, it may just be that you might be permanently stationed on a swing pushing a kid. That's okay. That's a good thing. Because one of the things we know that helps is that kids have as many relationships with adults as they can. Good, healthy, stable relationships. They know they've got people around them. That's something that we can do. Our small groups are a part of that. Signing up and being a part of that, having a group of folks that you can be accountable with, and good, healthy accountability to talk and discuss and grow in faith and work through the stuff that we're all dealing with. That's a good thing. Figuring out how we better engage with our older kids and with our high school age kids. How can we be a part of that? Other things that this might look like is just simply asking the question, what can we do to help parents and teachers and kids deal with what they're feeling and find healthy ways of working through those challenges? And it might just be that we say the same things that they're already learning at home and that they're learning at school, but hey, you know what? They can get it from another place that is good. Help to reinforce those things. And there's other things that we can still do. The easy answer, the churchy answer, is to say that the answer is always Jesus. And the answer is always Jesus. But you know what Jesus does? He says, "You're following me, right?" And we say, "Yes, Lord." And he looks at us and he says, "Good, you're my hands and feet. Let's get to work. Let's figure out what we can do." If we are serious about this prayer, we say, "Lead us, Lord." This is who he is calling us to be. Be a part of fixing things, of putting it right under his direction. As we let that work on us and go through us, as we go through this week, I invite you to say these words of the Lord's Prayer with me another time this morning. With the commas added with the ands in there. In fact, I had to go back and change the PowerPoint to make sure I had them in there. Will you say these words with me? Hear these words as a call for us, not to just grow in our faith, but to grow in the work that we do in Christ's name. Will you say this prayer with me? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.